Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging right into the ocean, not just, for its amazing beauty, but really for its critical economic future. And maybe surprisingly, we're going to look at the vital role of a specific industry that often gets overlooked. We're talking about the blue economy. It's this really compelling idea, this vision, aiming to balance human needs and planetary health through, well, sustainable use of our ocean resources.
Exactly. It's a huge concept.
Huge, and many industries play a part, obviously. But what if one of the most direct ways we, as citizens, engage with the ocean? I'm thinking scuba diving. What if that's actually one of its most undervalued economic forces? And conservation forces, too.
That's precisely what we're going to unpack for you today. You see, the global diving sector, it's a multi-billion dollar industry. It's in this really unique position to help drive the UN's Sustainable Development Goal 14. That's the one focused on life below water. But as our sources show, there are these significant, often quite hidden barriers, things preventing it from really reaching its full potential. And this is especially true when you look at the people who actually, work below water. We'll also dig into 5 key actions that our sources suggest could genuinely transform its impact.
Right. And for this deep dive, we've looked at quite a stack of insightful sources. There are 2 key papers from Frontiers in Marine Science, one by Matthew Forrest and colleagues, another by Zahida Efrat Nisa, and also a marine policy article by Nisa and her team, all pretty recent, 2022-2023. And these papers, they offer this fascinating, sometimes frankly quite surprising view on the economic muscle of diving, how it links to conservation, and this urgent need to look at the safety, the labor conditions of this often hidden workforce. Okay, so let's dive into the core idea first. The ocean. I mean, it supports livelihoods for over 3 billion people globally. It's massive.
Absolutely massive.
But it's under such serious threat. Climate change, pollution, overfishing, habitat loss, you name it. And that dire situation is really what sparked this whole blue economy concept. It's all about sustainable managing, using ocean resources to build resilience, boost economies, and crucially improve livelihoods for communities around the world.
And what's really striking here, looking at the sources, is how central the diving sector seems to be in this vision. We're talking everything from tourism, scientific research, professional instruction. It's all presented as pretty integral, especially for that SDG 14 goal, life below water. I mean, our sources point out that scuba diving and snorkeling, they've just exploded into these multi-billion dollar industries.
Yeah.
Millions of people doing it globally.
Yeah, and when you look at the actual numbers, it gets even more remarkable. In some countries, the money coming in from diving tourism, it's actually similar to, or sometimes even more than, what they get from fishing industries. Take the Bahamas, for example. Just the shark tourism diving part alone, that brings in an estimated, US $113.8 million a year. That's a serious economic footprint.
It really is. Yeah, and this brings up a really crucial paradox. Despite these huge economic contributions, the diving sector, it's still critically underrepresented in global marine conservation talks and even in these broader blue economy strategies. So it makes you ask the question, if it's so vital, why isn't it more recognized? Why isn't it celebrated, integrated into the global conversation?
Good question. The economic side is clearly huge,
Hmm.
but beyond just the tourist dollars, the fun dives, our sources really shine a light on this other crucial reality, the work below water that, underpins so much of this. And honestly, this is where the picture gets a bit, well, sobering. We're talking particularly about dive fishers, especially in small island developing states, or SIDs. These are literally the hidden workforce of the blue economy in many places.
And these individuals, they make truly substantial economic contributions, often at great personal risk, it has to be said. I mean, look at Fiji's pearl export industry that's US $13 million a year, or the Beshjamer trade, the sea cucumbers that generated US $25.5 million back in 2016 just from Pacific Islands. And the Bahamas, again, their lobster trade, US 75 to 90 million annually. That's like 40% of their total exports. And in that one fishery, the Bahamian lobster fishery, you've got about 9,000 dive fishers involved, 9,000.
Okay, so 9,000 people just in that one fishery making these incredible economic contributions you just laid out. So what do the sources tell us about the reality for these individuals working below water? Are their livelihoods, their safety, as secure as that economic impact might suggest?
Unfortunately, no, not really. Despite this massive economic impact, the sources reveal some deeply concerning gaps in labor protections, in safety. We're actually seeing an alarming rise in accidents, both fatal and non-fatal dive accidents. And they're often linked directly to a lack of proper training, inadequate gear, really unsafe working conditions. It points to a systemic failure, really. For instance, in Fiji's Beshjamer trade, when they shifted from free diving to using compressed air, but without the proper training. Well, that led to severe accidents. One study calculated the annual cost just for treating decompression sickness for only 50 divers, average around FJ $515,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, but the full cost to the Fijian village. When you factor in lost productivity, the social impact, that was estimated way higher, FJ $5.8 million. In another legal analysis, it highlighted 12 dive fisher deaths in Fiji in just a single year,
Yeah.
all in the sea cucumber industry. That fatality rate was triple the general rate.
12 deaths in 1 year in one industry. That's truly chilling. And it's not just Fiji, right? The sources bring up a similar and just as troubling situation in the Bahamas. You mentioned their lobster trade earlier. It was actually the first SID's fishery to get Marine Stewardship Council MSC certification. That's often seen as like the gold standard for environmental sustainability in fishing.
It is.
Yet the sources reveal this shocking truth. This prestigious certification completely ignored the safety and labor conditions of those 9,000 dive fishers involved. What does that tell us about the bigger picture here?
Well, our sources really pinpoint this as a classic example of something they call tourism colonialism. It's essentially where outside groups or certifications like MSC, they prioritize environmental goals, maybe profits, but they sideline, sometimes maybe inadvertently, sometimes more explicitly, equitable benefits and basic safety for the local communities.
Right.
You know, the ones actually doing the work and taking the risks.
Right.
In the Bahamas, these same dive fishers, they're even tackling invasive lionfish while they're down there diving for lobster.
Yeah.
So that adds another layer of risk, but without the proper support, the infrastructure. It's not just an oversight. The sources argue it highlights this systemic flaw in how we often define and measure sustainability. They also point out that the fishing vessels themselves often aren't even designed for safe diving operations, and that contributes to severe accidents, things like gas poisoning. And despite having clear guidelines from the International Labor Organization, the ILO, and calls from regional agreements like the St. George's Declaration, there's still this critical, persistent policy gap when it comes to integrating basic labor standards and safety.
That's a powerful and, pretty sobering assessment. But look, it's not all doom and gloom in these papers. Our sources don't just flag the problems. They actually lay out a really pragmatic, quite powerful roadmap. 5 key actions they reckon could truly transform the diving sector, make it a formidable force for the blue economy and sustainable development. So let's unearth them, starting with organize? What's that about?
Okay, so the first action is organize. The core idea here is that the diving sector's multi-billion-dollar economic clout is kind of ironically undermined because it's so disorganized, it's fragmented, it just lacks the cohesion you see in other major industries, and that really limits its collective voice when it comes to policy. So the sources suggest forming international associations, maybe federations, and definitely local alliances. Think of the Elba Diving Consortium in Italy. They successfully fostered sustainable practices among local operators there. Or the Guli Eco Trust in Indonesia. There was a self-organized effort by local dive businesses focused on conservation. And they also suggest learning from fishing cooperatives. They've often successfully invested in local production and gained real influence. That could be a powerful blueprint here.
Okay, organization is key. Building on that, the second action is recognize. What does that involve? This seems to be about formally acknowledging and maybe protecting the usage rights of local diving operators, local ecotourism businesses. Our sources bring up that issue of diving colonialism again, where foreign investors often dominate, taking profits but not really benefiting local communities enough.
Exactly.
A really compelling example they give is the Shark Reef Marine Reserve in Fiji. There, the dive operators actually agreed to pay the local villages for exclusive access and for restricting fishing rights, so the benefits flowed directly back to the community. And similarly, in Mexico's Cabo Pulmo National Park, recognizing how vital the coral reefs were led to this incredible 460% increase in fish biomass, and millions in local economic benefits, mainly through carefully managed dive ecotourism. Recognition matters.
Absolutely. Third, we move to modernize. Now, this action is all about leveraging technology, not just for diving itself, but for conservation and engagement, moving beyond just, the fun dive. Imagine diving-centric apps, a bit like the eBird platform for bird watching, which has been hugely successful. Apps that encourage what the sources call ocean citizenship among divers, getting them to actively contribute data.
Citizen science for divers.
Precisely. And then there's the Internet of Underwater Things, or IOUT, collecting passive data from divers-owned dive computers, things like temperature, depth data. That could be amazing for real-time monitoring. Even simple things like underwater QR codes. They could provide site information instantly, maybe track dive vessels for safety, enhance customer interaction. And then, of course, the more advanced tools like autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, they can really augment human efforts in collecting data, surveying large areas. These aren't just gadgets. The sources see them as powerful allies for conservation and monitoring.
Okay, technology's number 3. Then we have invest. This sounds pretty crucial. Setting up a proper diving business, especially with the right safety gear, the training,
Yep.
it's incredibly expensive. And the sources point out that often women, young people, marginalized communities, they bear these financial burdens
I
disproportionately.
did.
Plus, there's this massive blue finance gap highlighted in the research. To hit that SDG 14 goal by 2030, apparently we need something like US $174.52 billion annually.
Staggering number.
It is. But currently, only about US $25.5 billion is actually being spent globally. So this action invest calls for things like targeted subsidies for local cooperatives, ensuring access to credit, to loans, and maybe promoting sustainable tourism certifications not just as a nice to have, but as essential requirements for getting investment. And there are examples where this works, right? Like Raja Ampat, where marine park entry fees go directly into funding local conservation.
Yeah, or Malaysia, where revenue from shark diving tourism is reinvested back into managing marine protected areas. It shows it can be done and creates a virtuous cycle. Okay, and finally, the fifth action is foster. This one's really about cultivating a deep sense of civic responsibility, almost ownership, within the entire diving community. The aim is to inspire the next generation of leaders, to help them see diving as much more than just recreation, to see it as a potentially powerful force for ocean conservation, and importantly, community empowerment. The sources suggest learning from groups like the Surf Reader Foundation and the Surfing World. They've been really successful at mobilizing people for ocean literacy, pushing for legislative change.
Right, that's a great parallel.
So it means promoting diverse leadership, making sure women, indigenous peoples, young people are explicitly included, and subsidizing initiatives that empower local communities to actually lead their own conservation efforts. A great example mentioned is in Kimby Bay, Papua New Guinea. School kids got involved in education programs, and that directly led to the community establishing locally managed no-take marine areas. It's about building that grassroots movement, that sense of stewardship.
Okay. Organize, recognize, modernize, invest, foster. 5 clear actions. But it's also clear that these really need significant policy shifts to properly take hold. And our sources highlight this critical underlying problem. Even though the blue economy and SDG 14 are global priorities on paper, the actual integration of solid labor protections, social protections for this work below water, it just gets consistently overlooked in policymaking.
This is exactly where those connections, the interlinkages between different sustainable development goals become so crucial, particularly between SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 8, which is all about decent work.
Hmm.
You know, the Samoa pathway, that's a really vital policy framework, specifically for small island developing states.
Yeah.
It very clearly puts decent work right up there as a top priority for these nations.
Right. But here's what seems, well, baffling. Even with that clear recognition on paper, the sources show this consistent failure at the macro policy level. They just don't seem to bridge the gap between developing ocean economies and ensuring fundamental labor rights, safety, skills development for the underwater workforce. It's like they're operating in 2 completely separate spheres.
Yeah, and a key takeaway here is how current assessments, like for that MSc certification we talked about, while they might be commendable on the environmental side, they often completely ignore the human cost. The conditions of the workers just aren't part of the equation. And this persistent lack of a holistic view means that even when economic benefits from fisheries increase, the very workers making it happen can still face incredibly precarious conditions. It's a systemic problem. Our sources actually call it policy silos. Different government departments, different policy areas, they operate in isolation. They fail to see how environmental health and human well-being are fundamentally interconnected.